Welcome to Critical Moves of Telesur. What are the effects that the pandemic has caused in nations that still have not been able to be free from old big countries and that are still circulating as like a free country associated to, or the most general one, which is autonomous territory? This 24th of April is the day of anti-colonialism, and we're going to speak about the influence of the pandemic on these countries. Let's begin. Mandatories and representatives of international organisms have spoken about this context. Let's see what they say. It's about a military operation with no limits that's going to give public services in our French territories and other places other than France. This is within France as well as beyond the territories. The Royal Army has worked very strong that the Argus is going to be ready for the hurricane season to help all of the territories of the UK. We are worried because in some countries the level of compromise and the actions to show compromise are still not at the height of the pandemic that we were confronting. COVID-19 is now reaching all of these territories. This virus has showed how fast they can go from one border to another. The worst thing is still to come. The International Day of the Anti-Colonialism. When did it begin and by whom? Let's analyze. April 24 of 1955, Philippines gathered other countries of Africa, Middle East that celebrated this Eurasian summit called as the Bandung Summit. This marked the postures against imperialism, racism, colonialism. Ever since, the day has been established as the International Day of Anti-Colonialism. This happened in the midst of a Cold War that was growing, and this set the stage for the countries that are non-aligned. 10 years before, there had been a revolution cycle that was the foundation for this. This happened in the third world countries and peripheral countries that were in neither of the two countries that were confronted. As a consequence, we have the Chinese Revolution in 1949, the War Revolution of Vietnam up until 1975, the Cuban Revolution in 1959, and above all, the anti-colonialism movement that began in India in 1947 to Africa in 1975, where there were still some Portuguese, some countries. And then it went to the third world, where there were the main events of social transformation. This was associated to an ideal that is anti-colonialism, that put an end to many countries that were colonies of others. And it allowed for the appearance of new countries. Although many people lost their lives, there are still many colonies or protectorates of big countries, such as the case of Puerto Rico. Although United Nations has asked United States to give them back the right to self-determination, but they're not doing it. The French Guyana is considered a multi-sea country. The Falkland Islands that are illegally taken over by England is one of the most military zones of the country. It has 2 million troops of NATO, and they don't want to leave. Beyond Latin America, the Palestinians that are fighting against the occupation that is illegal on behalf of Israel, the International Day of Anti-Colonialism helps to support this right of the countries to self-determination and sovereignty. Such as the commander Hugo Chavez expressed, there is no solution for this problem of dependency within the borders of any country. Colonialism is an international problem, and the solution is also international. All throughout the world, and this happens throughout the 16th century. But let's go to our region. Let's see what happens here. colonialism in America between the centuries 16 and 17, European nations, France, UK, Portuguese, Holland, went to the American continent to take over. The reasons were mainly economic. They were trying to find sources and to open routes to find more resources and income. The possession of these territories also gave these countries an important geopolitical strength, so they can become hegemonic powers. As the legacy, we still have countries of Isles Turks, Anguilla, Virgin Islands, Montserrat, and Cayman Islands, Bermuda, and the Falkland Islands that are near Argentina. France has the ultra-sea territories that are like Guadalupe, French Guiana, Clipperton, Martinica, San Martin, Tomé, St. Pedro, and Miquelon, while Holland still has Aruba, Bonaire, Curacao, San Eustaquio, and the Isla Saba. Meanwhile, the United States has Navassa, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and the free associated state of Puerto Rico, and they also have Hawaii ever since 1898. Denmark only has Greenland, that is in the north, but this territory allows them to be part of the Nordic Arctic Circle. Let's begin with seeing our digital websites that are speaking of this topic of non-independent territories. And since we're going to be speaking of this map about America, let's speak about this online revision of what happens in Africa. For example, El Ciudadano speaks of United Nations and World Health Organization speak that 300,000 Africans might die of COVID-19. They warn that almost 300,000 might die of this pandemic. It has spread to 52 of the 54 African countries. Up until now, it has 18,000 cases and 1,000 deaths. If in normal cases, an urgent action would be necessary in Africa, in this context, it is necessary that the international community help all of the consequences that the pandemic is going to cause in Africa. This warning goes along with the COVID-19 report that was issued by UNECA that says that Africa is especially vulnerable because 56% of the population is concentrated in very poor territories or neighborhoods. Just a small percentage of the people have where to wash their hands, which was one of the main measures to stop the expansion of the COVID-19. According to the UNICEF, in sub-Saharan Africa, 74% of the population, 250 million people, lack of access to sanitary installations like a lavatory. Another one is the Correo de Orinoco from Venezuela. Dogma and Eto exploded against French doctors who want to test vaccines in Africa. Some doctors spoke of this possibility in a TV program. They said, shouldn't we try something in these tests in Africa where they have no masks or any gloves? Sometimes they do something against AIDS where they have prostitutes that have no type of protection. This is what Jean-Paul Mirat, the chief of the hospital of Cochin of Paris, the reaction of these two football players called them son of beep, and they called them as assassins, saying that they are nothing more than shit. Africa is not their backyard. Dogba was also very harsh in their declarations. They said this is totally incredible that we have to warn this. Africa is not a lab. He said the former Chelsea player He said that these measures are racist and try to help Africa from the coronavirus. Don't try to use the Africans as guinea pigs. It's gross to see how the African leaders, they have the obligation to protect their people. Dembaba, another former African football player of Senegal, said, "Welcome to the West, where the white people think they're superior, where racism and weakness is a banality. It's time to stand up." I would like to suggest that we read this article called "The Accounts That Are Still Missing of the Colonialism." This is written in Javier. It's called "It's Not the End of the World War, nor the establishing of the United Nations, which was able to weaken the racist waves and the colonialism or the imperialist policies. When United Nations was founded in 1947, like a third of the world population still lived in territories that depended on big powers. The United Nations Foundation says that there are still territories that have not been able to have self-government. This was a way to say colonialism. Although there was a commitment of the big powers to do away with them, but this has not happened. Throughout the process, there was a factor was the Declaration of the Human Rights of 1947 was fundamental. Ever since the creation of the United Nations, 80 former colonies have attained their independence. However, by now, from 2011 to 2020, there are still 17 territories that are still not autonomous. This process of decolonization has stopped. The last territory that broke their ties with the mainland is Timor, East Timor. This has to do with the non-disposition of the big countries to go forward with this disposition. The worst case is the territory of Chagos, where the General Assembly, as well as the International Court of Justice, has asked the UK to permit the Republic of Mauritius to go ahead with their process of decolonization. However, London does not hear the international calls like in other analog causes. Colonialism had made the geopolitical map seize like it is today, with borders that don't know anything about the local reality.
Políticas y sociales de los pueblos bajo dominación colonial e imponiendo las propias.
Let's expand on this. Let's go with our correspondent, Daisy Toussaint. She's from the Caribbean and she's speaking from there. Thank you. It's nice to see you. Amid the crisis of the pandemic, it is obvious the lack of attention that these colonies have. It is revealed the very tough situation of these colonies and the weak sanitary systems. If we see the French departments that are in the Caribbean, we can see how the French administration doesn't give Guadeloupe, French Guyana, and Martinica the rights that the people in France have. These islands that have been recently struck by natural disasters are now confronting this pandemic without the support of their government. The case of Puerto Rico, that is a colony of the United States ever since in 1998, they took over, and now with the status of free state, associated state ever since 1951, they cannot make decisions on their own, where they should be approved by the U.S. government. It is important to say that the Hurricane Maria passed through Puerto Rico, that caused so many deaths, with more than 3,000 dead, and showing how the United States president really didn't care to help the people in this emergency. Puerto Rico only has one delegate in the Congress, which doesn't have the right to vote. And now, amid this pandemic, it's even harder to carry out any actions. In fact, to avoid the spread of the COVID, the governor of Puerto Rico has asked the cancellation of any flights to come in. However, the government of the United States did not approve this measure, which showed the lack of autonomy in this island. Unable to close their territories, they are still victims. You can still see how basic the sanitary territories are. For example, Palestine, which is fighting against the illegal occupation of Israel. Now, April 24th, the International Day of Anti-Colonialism, in the memory of the Baghdun Conference that is celebrated one day like today in 1955, with several countries of non-aligned countries. This was a key summit of anti-colonialism and anti-imperialism. This in the context of the Cold War. It's important to say that a day like this, Dominican Republic celebrates the Revolution of April, where the people of Dominican Republic fought and rebelled against the Marines of the U.S. Back to you. Thank you very much, Daisy, for this report. Let's go to our first pause in our critical moves. Please remember, you can participate with us through the question of the day. Let's see it. What are the effects that the pandemic may cause in the territories understood as non-autonomous? Why do the countries not look at them? Let's go to our pause. We'll be right back.
The
pandemic of coronavirus has impacted on many countries, especially on those that the colonies that are lacking any type of protection. The new coronavirus has put to test the resistance of countries that historically took over many territories over the complex system of the colonies. Countries such as Spain, Portugal, UK, and France are now transforming the worst victims of this virus. They register the major number of people that are contaminated and dead. Spain, the second country that has been most affected, with one of the major death rates, with over 20,000 people dead. The COVID has also attacked doctors and health workers. Let's not forget that they themselves were demanding for more help before the pandemic. And now they're trying to look for this immunity of groups by which the European would try to infect everybody and then become immune. The late measures have provoked the rejection of the international community. Boris Johnson has been one of the most criticized due to the lack of management of this pandemic. The United States also shows the lack of the system in the health system, and they try to use it politically and blame China for everything and keep on condemning China. It also shows how they don't look at Puerto Rico to protect them. This is a free protectorate of the United States, but now they don't even look at them. Let's begin the first part of analysis of our critical moves. We have Esteban Silva. He's a sociologist from Chile, and from the United States we have Professor Stubel. He's an international analyst. I would like to greet you both to our critical move. We would like to analyze the topic of the colonies that are still remaining in the world and how they confront this pandemic. But when we speak of colonies, we say that the protectorate, ultra-sea departments that are not still recognized. It's necessary to go back into history and to see the moment through which their so-called protectors are passing through. Yes, it's important to see this distinction. And it's obvious because, as you said at the beginning, at the introduction of our dialogue, there are 17 non-autonomous territories that are recognized by the fourth session of decolonization of the United Nations. There are others that are not there, but they still depend on bigger countries, and they have not been able to attain their independence, such as the case of Puerto Rico or Palestine. But this does affect all of the countries, both the ones that live in the metropolis as well as those who have had colonies domination, some until now, or some who have had very important influence. For example, there is a very emblematic case that is among the autonomous territories that are still trying to become independent, which is the West Sahara. And let's not forget that the Sahrawis are the only ones that speak Spanish in North Africa, whose territory are occupied by Morocco with this colonialistic logic, where you still have numbers that are not transparent of people that have been infected by coronavirus. Cities like Layún, Netahla, but there are still important amounts of Sahrawis that are detained, and that they're political prisons in the prisons of Morocco that have been an object of an international campaign, of a campaign of many countries that are directed to Dr. Bachelet, who's the Commissioner of Human Rights and the General Secretary, and they want to show the very tragic situation they live by. We have where these people are asking to be liberated because of this expansion of the pandemic. However, let's not forget that all of the prisoners are political prisoners. So this is of high complexity. These are two these that have big impact. One, the economic crisis that they confront, that these colonies are still confronting. One, in the food department, And let's not forget that there is a huge impact in refugees. For example, the Western Saharaui. You have thousands of refugees in Argelia. And each one of these situations that you see of colonies, of powerful colonies, but here we've mentioned others. We speak of Puerto Rico, but we can also speak of the Guam, the islands of Guam, Samoa. We have a very big problem that has nothing to do with the coronavirus and the impact of the coronavirus. But we have to aid them in humanitarian help. These territories that are under the pressure of big countries, but basically on how to advance in the process of stopping this colonialism. It's how we should confront these actions and give them better situations, better conditions of self-sufficiency, of sovereignty to these territories that are confronting pandemics such as this one, but also the economic crisis that comes along with the situation. And that is particularly hard for millions of people who are still fighting for their independence. These are processes that are long. Thank you, Esteban. Please stay in line with us. I would like to talk to Dr. Ramon. We were seeing images of Puerto Rico, and we saw our correspondent from Dominican Republic. And I would like to take advantage to speak of some numbers. Practically, we could say that now that they're a victim of the third pandemic, because let's not forget Hurricane Maria that affected this island terribly. Then the people of Puerto Rico had this political limbo that are still going on in the local aspect. And now we see this pandemic of COVID-19. Well, in fact, Puerto Rico, when the United States sneezes, in the colony there's a pneumonia. This is a metaphor to say that if things are not going well in the mainland, you could not even imagine what's going on in the colony. This is something that can be said due to the Great Depression where the United States is going to. This is not a recession, this is a big depression. And this is going to have awful consequences on Puerto Rico because they don't have sovereignty on anything. So now with this pandemic, there were no conditions. So if the United States has the crisis they have, you can't even imagine what's going to happen to Puerto Rico. And this is all caused of the invasion of the United States. And the United States and Puerto Rico has to pay a big debt towards the United States. And first they have to pay the investors of Wall Street, and then anything that has to do to education and health. And the truth is that Puerto Rico, in a couple of years, 14,000 jobs have been lost of health workers. There are 66 hospitals, of which 52 are private hospitals. And now, amid this pandemic, many workers have been kicked out. There have been many hospitals that were closed. In other words, Puerto Rico is in a situation that is terrible, especially with this pandemic, and there is no sovereignty to be able to close a territory and protect them from the entry of people that could make the situation even worse. For example, the crisis that's happening in New York due to the exchange of New York and Puerto Rico. This has had a great repercussion in Puerto Rico, and the only one who has that has power over closing the border is the U.S. government. Same thing
en
happens
Palestina.
in Palestine.
En Palestina, nosotros vemos
Palestine,
también
we
una
see
situación muy
a
parecida a la
very
de
similar
Puerto Rico.
situation of the one in Puerto Rico.
En Palestina, donde
In
vemos
Palestine,
que
where we
hay
see
una especie
that there is a
de
sort of
situación donde
a
los
situation where
territorios ocupados tienen
the
una
occupied
situación muy parecida, donde no
territories
tienen poder de cerrar la frontera,
have no power
no
of
tienen
closing
poder
the
poder,
borders,
tener soberanía sobre el
and they
territorio.
cannot have
La
sovereignty
situación en
over the
Palestina,
territories.
como sabemos, es de
And
una
the situation
precariedad
of
brutal
Palestine
porque
is
la
devastating
ocupación
because the
israelí,
occupation of
lo que hace
Israel
es destruir toda la infraestructura
has
del
destroyed
país,
all of the
incluyendo todos los
infrastructure of the
servicios
country.
médicos. Entonces estamos hablando de
And so we're
territorios
speaking of
que en medio de
territories
una
that in
pandemia
the midst of
tienen las peores
a
condiciones posibles
pandemic that has
para
the worst
enfrentarlo.
situation possible to confront it.
Retornando a Puerto Rico,
Going back to
Ramón,
Puerto Rico,
dada la experiencia,
given the
mala
experience,
experiencia
the
vivida
bad experience, I should
durante la
say,
propia administración del presidente
during the
Donald
Trump
en el
administration,
contexto del huracán
in the
María,
context of
¿qué
Hurricane Maria,
pudiéramos esperar en
what can we
materia de
expect
ayuda
in terms of
al
help
Estado Libre Asociado?
to this free associated state?
En materia, bueno, la realidad es
Well,
que la
the truth
administración
is
Trump toda la vida ha
that the
estado,
Trump
o sea,
administration
durante estos 4 años ha estado prometiendo cosas que no
has
cumple.
promised things
La
that they've
agenda
never
de
gone
Trump
through
es
with.
una agenda
The Trump
de
agenda
satisfacer
is just to
las
satisfy
demandas de los supremacistas blancos.
the demands of the
Entonces,
white
Puerto Rico es como una
supremacists.
especie de vitrina simbólica que él
So
usa
this
para
is,
enviar un mensaje a
he
su
just
audiencia
uses the
de mira
presidency
cómo
to
trato
send
yo a los latinos.
a message
Entonces, por ejemplo,
against
si
the
recuerda,
Latinos.
durante
So let's not
después
forget,
del huracán,
during the first hurricane,
no solamente nunca llegó la ayuda que
the help
prometieron
never
que iba a llegar, que no es que
received.
sea
It
una
was
ayuda
never
que
received.
Puerto Rico no ha pagado, Puerto Rico ha pagado
And
toda
what they
la
say is
vida,
that Puerto
la
Rico
comunidad
has not
social
paid,
federal
and it's not
americana
true.
tiene derecho a
They have paid
recibir
everything,
a
and they
cambio,
have the right to receive everything.
dinero para situaciones de emergencia como esta.
And they should
Eh,
receive the money for these
ese
type of
dinero nunca llegó.
emergencies.
Y además, ¿qué hizo Trump? Fue a
And what
visitar
did
a
Trump
Puerto
do?
Rico y
He
a
went to Puerto Rico
lanzarle
and he
papel,
was throwing kitchen paper
higiénico, etcétera,
and
como un
toilet
acto
paper.
simbólico, si te
This
recuerdas,
was symbolic
aquellos
and it was
videos donde
offensive.
aparecía Trump
I think we
tirándole
can't
papel
forget these
higiénico a los
videos.
puertorriqueños. Y esos son actos simbólicos
Those were
que
symbolic acts
van directamente a
that go
la audiencia
directly
que
to
sigue
the
a Trump, que
audience
son
that follow
supremacistas
that
blancos,
follow Trump, who are white
racistas,
supremacists, they're
antilatinos,
racist,
antinegros. Y
anti-Latinos,
entonces,
anti-black
lo mismo
people,
ocurre ahora.
and the
Ahora,
same
en
thing
medio
happens
de
now.
esta pandemia,
Now, amid this
Trump, lo menos que le
pandemic,
interesa es
Trump
Puerto Rico.
is
Puerto Rico en
he's
todo
not
caso es
concerned
una
at all
vitrina
about Puerto
donde
Rico.
otra vez Puerto Rico han prometido ayudas que no
And
han
Puerto
llegado
Rico,
nunca.
what they've done is just
Y
promise
yo creo
things
que
and
la
that
situación
never
en Puerto
arrive.
Rico es
I
bastante
think that
caótica
the
en este
situation of
momento,
Puerto Rico is
porque
totally
al no tener
chaotic
soberanía
because
sobre nada,
since they don't
y al
have any
tener una
sovereignty,
situación de
and with
despojo
this,
y violencia tan brutal
with all of the
en la
violence that
isla
they
con
have in the
respecto a los
island,
recortes presupuestarios,
in terms of
a
what
la
all of the
intervención
lack of money that
del
is
capital
sent
financiero
by the
americano
mainland,
sobre los presupuestos de la
and they
administración
don't have
colonial,
any
etcétera.
decision over their
La situación
budgets.
ahora mismo en Puerto Rico es muy
So the
caótica,
situation in Puerto Rico is
en
chaotic
términos de la
in terms
atención a esta pandemia.
of the medical assistance for this
Gracias, Ramón.
pandemic.
Ya por último, Esteban, en este momento
And
de la
Esteban,
entrevista quisiera
I would
preguntarle,
like to ask you,
¿quedan 17 territorios
there are
no
still
autónomos
17
mundo,
non-autonomous
con
territories in
el
the world?
recrudecimiento de la situación en esos territorios?
Now with this
dada la llegada de la pandemia del
situation of
COVID-19, ¿qué
the
esperanzas hay
pandemic,
para que se
what are the
destrabe
hopes
el proceso de independencia?
that this independence movements might go forward?
Quiero decir, si me permite,
Well, if I can
que
say
efectivamente la
that in
situación
fact the
de
situation
Puerto Rico,
of
la
Puerto
necesidad de su
Rico,
independencia,
their
de su libertad,
independence,
es una
of their
herida abierta
liberty,
para toda,
it's an
nuestra
open
América.
wound for all of
duda cabe.
America.
Pero respecto de tu pregunta,
But in terms of your
evidentemente,
question, obviously,
la crisis global
the global crisis that has brought forward this pandemic
y que va a seguir teniendo
and that will
repercusiones
keep
globales,
on having
va a tener
global
que ver con una
repercussion.
discusión sobre el tema de la riqueza, del patrimonio
There will be
global, de la recuperación de la fuerza,
everybody's
de los
going to
estados,
lose
de la
money
salud
and
pública,
governments are
de
not going to
los
be
temas
able
de la
to
alimentación,
jump
etcétera.
back
Va a
very
alcanzar
quickly. This
también
will
el tema
also
de los pueblos que están bajo
affect the
colonialismo
countries
y
that
que
are
luchan
under
por su
colonialism
descolonización.
and that are
Y desde ese
fighting
punto
to
de
be
vista,
free.
a propósito
So
de
from
los
this
11
point of
territorios
view,
que
if we see those territories that are non-autonomous, that are autonomous, but they are trying to go forward with their struggle to become independent, this will be a central topic, because the economic effects of the pandemic and the change of society that will come forward will have to do with the need of more structural solutions that would allow these territories that fight for their independence. And from this point of view, I think one of the fundamental policies should be that United Nations will have to have a bigger appearance in these type of problems. United Nations will have to prioritize in this new context. They will have to solve these pending subjects that are permanently blocked by the great powerful countries, by allied countries. These are blocked in the Security Council, and I think that there should be an advance with a special envoy to decolonialize these countries and to attain their self-determination. This is with 11 territories, and with other countries that don't have a real independence and autonomy, such as the case of Puerto Rico or the case of Palestine. Thank you very much, Esteban, for your dissertation. I want to also thank Ramon, your participation in Critical Moves. Let's go to our pause. But let's not forget, there's the question of the day, and you can participate with us and be an analyst in the program. What are the effects of the pandemic, COVID-19, on the territories that are considered non-autonomous in the world? Let's go right back. What are the resources of these countries, and what can they do? Let's see how protected these territories are. In the world, there are 17 territories that are considered non-autonomous, which means that they are the last colonies according to United Nations. Many of those have confronted to many complex situations, to various natural disasters, while the answer of the metropolis are the lack of public policies to avoid the loss of territory. An example was shown in Puerto Rico before and after the passing of Hurricane Maria. The condition in which this free territory, associate territory, revealed the conditions they had to confront such a disaster. At least $90 billion in destruction was caused, and after some days of the passing of the hurricane, 95% of the population didn't have electricity nor telephone, and more than half of the people didn't have water. Then soon after, Donald Trump visited the island, and what was seen on television was how he was throwing kitchen paper to the people. What he did was to condemn the local government, saying how much money that Puerto Rico was owing them. And what they also did was to reduce the amount of the loan that they were going to give Puerto Rico to help them for the reconstruction. After Maria, the rate of poverty went from 42 to 53% in just 3 months. 9% of the people that before the hurricane lived with low income went to extreme poverty. Let's go with the analysis. Now from Spain, we have Mr. Perez. Welcome to our Critical Moves. Juan Luis, I would like to analyze the topic of colonies that are still upheld in the world, and the role that their metropolis, or whatever name we want to call them, But in essence, those are the metropolises that still have some type of influence, have displayed during this time of the pandemic. And I would like to ask, this lack of attention on behalf of the protectorate of these autonomous states, is it intentional, or is it because they just can't deal with their own problems? Let's see, of course, if these metropolis, such as the UK or the United States, if these metropolis, they're not even looking after their own citizens. Can you imagine what can happen with taking care of citizens of second degree, like the ones they think that these people are second grade citizens of the colonies? So of course, the United States is overwhelmed with all of the people, almost a million infected and 50,000 dead. This is devastating for them. They still have to keep on adding up the dead people and the infected. So now these two countries are only dedicating themselves to their own citizens. And what we see is that the United States and the UK, at least at the beginning, they did not do much. They just let many people die. It's 60,000 in the case of the UK. This social immunity that they were looking after, in case that people were not confined. But from now, we can see a second analysis that in countries like the UK and the United States, they do consider people of first degree and second degree. Of course, this has been very clear in the numbers of New York. At the beginning, people were asking themselves, why did it seem that coronavirus affected much more the Latino community or the black community? They were surprised because this is something of class. This is affect poor people much more, those who do have access to medicine. And of course, they don't have a strong immune system because their food is not that good. Their nutrition is not optimal. And now the situation in the colonies is going to be left for a third or fourth phase. So they might have to, they would have to confront some type of social protest due to this abandoning. But if it didn't have after the Hurricane Maria, but I just don't think that they will be able to cause the independence. And what they should do is to regain their sovereignty so they can have full capacity of, so they can confront a pandemic such as these. In this context, what can we say about the territories that are occupied, like Palestine, that are occupied by Israel, or Gaza, that is now blocked by the Zionist government? And when I speak of that they're blocked also in the sanitary system. Well, in Palestine, which has no sovereignty, they don't have the resources to confront this pandemic. The only thing that they're asking is that just to be left alone and to let health organizations to help them. But we have seen how for many weeks now the Zionist government has destroyed many clinics, many community clinics that were being built because apparently they were infringing some law. They even took the material that were going to be used to construct these clinics. And then the Gaza population is being confined in a situation that doesn't have energy or sanitary conditions. Unfortunately, I think weather might improve and this will help them a lot. On the other hand, we have spoken of what happens in the prisons of Israel, where the Palestinians are confined, many of them with no charges, just awaiting a trial where many hundreds of children are there. There are women. We have asked for the liberation of all of the Palestinian prisoners, especially humanitarian groups, because we have seen how in prisoners they have sent in Israeli investigators that are tested positive for COVID. And of course, they're spreading the pandemic in these prisons. Let's not forget that other countries, on the contrary, have opened up the prisons so people won't be infected, and they're liberating people. This is important with the huge amount of political prisoners that we have in Palestine. Palestinians that are being held in Israel. Let's see what happens in Africa. 52 of 54 countries are infected already. So the majority, countries which some are still colonies and others that have reached their independence. So the metropolises that have left these territories have sacked all of the resources they had, and they left them with poverty, lack of security systems, education systems, sanitary systems. How can we put an end to the situation on this impoverished continent? And according to the World Health Organization and United Nations, they're going to become even more poor. Well, I think that it's even worse, because many times when we speak of colonies in Africa, we tend to say that this happened in the past, and that the legacy that was left behind was not that big. But no, it's much worse than that. We must say that France controlled the currency of 17 countries that are allied of Sahel, and that any expenditure that any government of these wants to do has to come with the approval of the Central Bank of France. And this is a very hard currency which is unmanageable on these countries. But France doesn't let them have their own currency, and without their own currency they can't be sovereign, and they're still considered as colonies. This is the case of countries that tried to break this dependency, creating their own currency, and they took like a week until there was a coup d'etat, and they changed the president for a president that was more friendly to them, and they kept the dominion of the French franc. This is why France lives way beyond their possibilities of their economy. And to sub-Saharan France, there is still much to be said before they can say that they are no colonies anymore. This is what happens now, and this is why France maintains misery in a great part of Africa. That's why most of the Africans try to go to Europe. What are the hope that we can see in this panorama, seeing the post-pandemic phase? Just in the minute of the last question, we lost communication with Juan Luis González. He's an expert in international policies. Let's go to our conclusions. As we saw, the situation of the pandemic is much worse in the colonies. These are countries that are not sovereign. To their extreme poverty, lack of access to sanitary systems, now there is a disattention on behalf of their protectorates that are coincidentally having their own crisis. What are the consequences of all this? COVID-19 will make these colonies even further from their sovereignty. Well, imperialism is even worse now. The upcoming future will tell us. For now, this is all.